Good afternoon. Welcome to afternoon meeting of the BOCC. Oh, there he is. I didn't know if you had Rotary today or not. So today we have Wasack with us. I see a couple familiar faces on there. Yeah. So
How are you, Derek? How are you, Derek? Congratulations on your promotion.
Well, thank you. I don't know if promotion is the right word for it. Director, you're my boss now.
Mark, good to see you too.
Thanks for having us. Nice to see you guys.
I didn't have an agenda for this, so I might just turn it over and let you introduce yourself. And
recording in progress.
We got echoes going on.
Not anymore.
You got it? Okay.
Well, I'll let Commissioner Ozias start.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everybody. I think I met all of you. Mark Ozias. I'm a McClellan County Commissioner and currently serving as the second Vice President for Wasack. And really thank you for making some time for us for this conversation today.
Sure.
And I'm Derek Young. I'm the Interim Executive Director for the Washington State Association of Counties. And also, thank you so much for making time. We know this is both a little short notice and it's not our typical courthouse visit. We're trying to talk to as many counties as possible before our membership meeting. And so I look forward to making it out to Cowlitz here in the near future, but this will have to work for today. So I do have a presentation. If your staff wants to operate, they can do so, or I can operate.
Got it? I think Kelly's got it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. So again, thank you again for having us. I am not new. We have a couple things to update you on. And for those of you that know me, it's probably from my time on the Wasack Legislative Steering Committee. I'm not new to the county family. I spent 8 years on the Pierce County Council. All of those years tormenting Commissioner Weber in our LSC meetings, and then was termed out a little over a year ago. I guess a year and a half ago. So you may be wondering what the term interim is for, and it's safe to say, and as many of you may be aware, the county family's had a little bit of turmoil over the last year, and so we've been making some changes in the way we're doing things, and wanted to update you on the first part of that process, which is complete, and we have an example of how it's going. And I'm pleased to report things went really well. And then we'll get to what is next on the upcoming at the membership meeting. So first of all, the Legislative Steering Committee has for years operated on a single vote per county basis. But that was, they decided to make some changes coming out of last year's general membership meetings in order to make sure that all counties had a chance to get the issues that they're interested in onto our priority agenda. And so they, prior to my arrival, actually, they devised a process where proportional voting will be used for the urban issues. They still have to reach a 2/3 threshold, so it can't just be a handful of large counties deciding what to do. You really have to get a broader group of folks to agree to an issue. We also saved 2 spots for rural issues, and that went the traditional method where there was more smaller rural counties that were able to put forward their top priorities. And then finally, we had space for 2 all county issues, which required an 85% consensus from the membership. And that high threshold was to guarantee consensus across the organization. And in fact, we ended up with 3 rather than 2 because each was liked so much by the membership. So the new voting procedure worked pretty well. And I think everyone came out of the process feeling good about it. I don't know that everyone got 100% of what they wanted, but felt like they were heard. To me, walking into this as the interim director after it was already put in place, it felt like we were putting into writing the ways we operated sort of on an unwritten rule basis, trying to make sure everyone had a chance to have their voice heard. And so if we've got to formalize it, maybe that works better. Next slide, please. So here's the agenda that we came up with. It's 2 slides. And so the first is new county revenue. The important thing here is that basically all of our counties are in a similar shape in that the shared revenue decreased, the tax caps, and the increased unincorporated, unpaid for mandates, unfunded mandates from the state have all basically combined to put our budgets in crisis. The state auditor recently said that about 2/3 of our counties are facing significant budget challenges, and the rest aren't far behind. So we need to talk with the state about new county revenue. The second, and probably the largest unfunded mandate, if and in spirit, if not in law, is indigent defense. As you know, our budgets have dramatically increased for indigent defense over the last 10 years since the last caseload standards were implemented by the Supreme Court. And the proposed caseload standards that we have seen recommended to the Supreme Court would do even more damage. So we've been able to begin collecting information from all of our public defender's offices. In fact, Cowlitz, we just saw something today. And they run the gamut because everyone's in a little bit different position. But it's safe to say most counties are seeing a 2 times, 3 times increase in their costs. And that's even if they can find the attorneys that will cover on contracts or for hiring. So it's a very difficult circumstances, and we need to be working on that this session. Funding for rural county corners is a big one for a number of our smaller counties that, because of new standards, have had to work on this. And so that was one of the issues that they brought up. FSEC, if you're not familiar, this is regarding new energy projects that in their siting. And so the purpose of FSEC is really to get around other regulations for citing these projects, including your own local zoning, growth management, and building permits. So there's a few different ways to approach the issue. One is to allow more local input into the process. Another is to have some legal hold harmless so that you're not being dinged for growth management violations or anything of that sort. And also to tell the public that, really the counties aren't the ones permitting these projects. So there's a number of things that we need to do around FSEC. It's mostly at this point been hitting some of the Eastern Washington counties with wind and solar projects. And to be clear, some of these projects are supported. It's that not all of them are, and that's frustrating for a number of these counties. But we will see more of them here in Western Washington in the near future. The next one is accountability for behavioral health continuum of care. When we changed our behavioral health system a few years ago, there weren't a lot of standards put into place that are sensible to make sure that our folks are getting the services that they need. So the desire here was to both implement some new standards and reopen bidding on contracts so that if the contractors are not living up to their responsibilities, that we have an opportunity to make a change. Next slide, please. The next one, in previous years, housing access and affordability may have been more of an urban issue, but really has hit hyperdrive into a lot of rural counties, especially with the change to more remote work. And so it's become more of a statewide problem. This may include some land use changes. It may include some funding solutions. But the point being that housing access and affordability has reached a crisis point. And then finally, we believe that the legislature will be doing a round of transportation preservation and maintenance funding. And as you're aware, the last few funding rounds, counties were largely left out, as were cities. And so we want to make sure that if there is going to be a package, that we're part of it. And that work is beginning as we speak. So any questions before I move on to the proposed bylaw changes that we're going to get to?
Derek, I had a question about the FSEC.
Yeah.
Proposals. I know that there are some individuals in our county that have purchased and installed small scale windmills.
Mhm.
What's the minimum size in which FSEC rules wipe out local land use regulations?
You know, that's a good question, and I don't know what the standard is. I believe it's got to be, you know, at significant scale, but I don't know. I don't have a specific answer for you. So let me check on that, and I'll circle back with you all and get you a response.
Okay. Similarly, we are in negotiations with our PUD to take most of our excess methane from land use
Oh yeah.
and convert it into electricity. That's going to help the PUD diversify their source of electricity. But are we going to be dumped on by FSEC for a whole new series of land use rules and regulations just to try to get this methane solved?
Should not have an additional regulatory effect. The purpose of it is really to streamline regulations, and from the state's perspective, it's about, you know, removing multiple barriers along the way so that there's a one-stop shop for these major projects. I would be surprised, therefore, that it would add an additional layer. But again, let me check on that and make sure, and I will circle back with you.
So it gets a little bit complicated because we've gotten pretty strong messages that the state legislature wants us to remove all food products from the waste stream.
Yeah.
Which of course is the main source of the putrescence and the methane gas production. So we're getting mixed signals. Either they want us to diversify our energy sources or not. And so that's going to be a push point, I think, as far as we're concerned.
Certainly would seem logical that your existing methane gas source should be put to better use rather than just leaking, which is both, you know, a larger impact for climate change than CO2 is. But
Well, we're actually eliminating our methane by using natural gas to burn it off.
so it's that
And,
will work.
and commissioners and
There. So I at least for the production for that's already there, it seems logical that you should be able to convert it. And I know that's something that Pierce County was looking at as well. It was in fact, even for the not just the solid waste, but the sanitary sewer system, they were looking at that because there's off gassing there as well.
And commissioners and Derek, I went ahead and dropped a link in the chat that has a pretty good overview from FSEC's webpage about what installations are subject to FSEC oversight.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
You bet.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And on the accountability for behavioral health services, I know the Great Rivers Behavioral Health Organization actually created a clinic to try to fill in the gaps because we were pretty convinced that the rural areas were going to get the short shrift of the automated, super efficient system delivery, which may be effective in more urban areas, but it's leaving out people. So I hope in terms of accountability, you don't eliminate the option for counties to collaborate and create these clinics.
No, in fact, I think you'll be happy because all the discussion I've heard has been about encouraging more localized response because you're all more familiar with what the needs are in your communities, and so making sure there's some flexibility there. That doesn't mean that you have to reduce standards, but you know, if you need clinics in your region, making sure that that's a possibility.
Was
And
there
quite
much,
frankly, that I just anecdotally, I've heard good things about your BHO. So I mean,
Great.
That's
um,
unsolicited compliment for your organization. We've heard some others though that maybe don't measure up to that same standard.
um, th- was there any discussion at all about problems some of us are facing with our juvenile detention facilities? Fully staffed but hardly used is how we can describe it. And what I'm referring to is the fact that they don't throw kids in juvie for truancy anymore.
Mhm.
So while we have facilities for close to 50 guests, if we want to call them that, we're lucky to get maybe a dozen.
Commissioner Weber, I can speak to that. While that did not get elevated as one of those recognized priorities, at several of the roundtables, sort of those Wednesday evening roundtables at LSC, there was a fair amount of conversation about juvenile detention facilities. And I would not be at all surprised, depending on how things shape up during the session, to see, to see counties come together in some way with some sort of an ask along those lines. And if not for this session, that's definitely on the near term horizon, at least based on the conversations that I overheard and participated in at a couple of those meetings.
Thanks.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I've heard some legislators having discussions about that. So there may be some energy that we can help support that may not necessarily be on our priority list, and for the other commissioners that may not be as familiar with the process, just because an issue isn't on this list doesn't mean we won't be working on it. In some cases, legislators will need some help crafting their bills that they want to run on their own. In others, we may need to run a little bit of interference for some of their good ideas that may make life harder for county government. And in other cases, maybe an individual county will find a sponsor and will want to be supported. So that we basically look at our policies statement and make a determination if that fits. And during session, we won't take a position unless, and again, we go back to that 85% standard. 85% of the LSC supporting it means we can actually take a position. Otherwise, our position during session will be neutral on these issues. And we can work within that, to express concerns that counties have without taking a formal position. So getting to the bylaw changes, this is the purpose of the meeting we've called. And really part of the reason that we've got this temporary meeting or this special meeting is that some great work is happening with the bylaws committee, and we'd like to buy some time for them to continue. And so the first of those is really, that's what the purpose is. You may recall that last year there was a new rule adopted that said all dues need to be paid by June 30th in order to remain an active member. So for example, King County chose not to, and so they're no longer an active member. However, we're in a situation where Snohomish and Pierce are also not fully paid. And as a compromise to keep things moving in this right direction, because again, we think we're close, that they would pay half and give us more time to finish up the bylaw work. We think that part is basically done, but really focus on the dues question that keeps coming up, and that'll take a little more time. So that's the reason for it. It's basically just an additional extension in time. The second is proportional voting. So you may recall that this was something that came up last year in a different form. This is a new and improved idea. And it's a recognition of the fact that we want to make sure that everyone is fully represented in any vote that takes place, either at the board or in the General Assembly. So each county starts with a single vote, and that's the baseline. From there, for each $10,000 in dues that are paid, you increase by an additional vote. So, for example, the smallest counties, they will all have one, whereas some of the others that are paying $100,000 would get 10 votes. Right now, we actually have a system where it's not based on population or dues. It's based on the number of members, elected officials that you have. So, for example, King County, which has 9 council members and an elected executive, has 10 votes, and all the other counties have 3 that aren't charter counties. A couple of our additional charter counties have different numbers on their council and executive. So, and one of them doesn't have an executive at all, an elected executive. So, it in a way is simplifying things, but also makes it clear that we will have some reflection of the dues in that voting. I would also note that it also depends on, in the General Assembly vote, how many of your elected officials show up. So, each member only counts if they were there or online. In this case, we'll have a single member will be designated by the county to deliver their votes. It still allows you to split the vote in case you have a local dispute. And I can tell you that having this process for other agencies, you will see Pierce County from time to time split their vote, and I'm sure other counties will as well. But that allows you to deliver your votes whether or not your other members are there. The next one is adding additional board seats for the elected executives in the 3 largest counties. It's for a population over 750,000. We may end up with a couple other counties eventually getting there in the near future. But that seat would also be allowed to be served as a proxy by staff. And then finally, the dues section. We established dues in our policies and procedures that are passed in the fall, along with our budget, because it's driven by the budget needs. So there is a section on dues currently in there, and the proposal is to clean that up by calling out fairness and equity as consideration, not trying to push too much of our dues down to the smallest counties that can't really afford it, while also recognizing that there's some changes that need to be made for some of the larger members. It also calls for a change from a strictly population-based to looking at the actual capacity of that local government. So in this case, we've been thinking about general fund capacity as a mixture in there. That's specifically coming from Snohomish County because of some quirks in their system. They have a much smaller general fund capacity than Pierce, while being in similar size. So it would mix in that kind of consideration. And so those dues would eventually be set once we get to the closer to the fall. But again, this is all about driving forward with more positive work that the bylaws committee has been doing. And anything to add, Commissioner Ozias?
Just real briefly, I've sat on the legislative steering committee and the bylaws committee and the dues committee has been working on all of this. And we've really worked through a lot of different constructs and ideas to try and arrive at something that ensures that all counties have the chance to impact decision-making, and that all counties have the chance to participate. All counties have the chance to have their voice heard, and the additional board seat for large counties is an attempt to recognize that there's often a disconnect, or at a minimum, a lack of effective regular communication sometimes between the executive branch and the legislative branch of government in larger counties. And that disconnect is part of what has led us to the little bit of a crisis that we're in right now. So I think that we've worked pretty hard to arrive at this series of recommendations. And as someone who's participated in the work, I really have seen both Pierce and Snohomish counties engaging in a really productive way. I think they have learned a lot. And what I have learned throughout all of this process is, and what I am continually trying to focus our conversation on, is making sure that all members of this organization see and experience the value of it. I think if you participate, it's pretty easy to see the value. If you don't participate, you don't see the value. And if you don't see the value, you're not going to participate. And so, trying to figure out how to get around that is pretty important. And so that is one step in that direction. And while we've really been focusing on Snohomish and Pierce counties this year, we have also, of course, continued to stay in contact with King County. And Derek might be able to speak to this with a little bit more detail, but it sounds that in all of those large counties, there's been some increasing recognition that the lack of participation and awareness has really impacted the way that those counties think about Wasac, and an internal recognition that they need to do some work to change that. So I am hopeful that the group at large at our meeting in June, I'm hopeful that we'll have good attendance, and I'm really hopeful that the organization is going to support the suite of changes. Allow us a little bit more time to focus on an evolved dues construct and continue along with the work. When we ended last year, I was feeling relatively pessimistic, and through the work that has been done this year and through the experience that the Legislative Steering Committee went through in terms of trying to develop and utilize a new process, what I've seen is a slow and steady building of trust, or rebuilding of trust, and these changes, I think, will allow us to continue that conversation so that we can pursue recapturing a strong, vital, and vibrant organization.
Any questions from the commission?
Not seeing any.
Okay. Well, that works too. And yeah, I'll just close by agreeing with Commissioner Ozias. It's actually been kind of interesting as someone that was always pretty active with Wasac, talking with some of the folks from the larger counties who really weren't. Their perception difference was interesting. In going around with the commissioners as I started this, it was clear that, and I think it's somewhat the disadvantage of being a rather large agency is you're not talking to your staff all the time about how they're benefiting from it, for example. And, so I keep hearing from these staff members that are like, what's going on with our electeds? And I'm like, well, they're not seeing the value that and from their perspective, they're just, like thinking, well, gosh, we do, this is really important. And if they're not engaging in the legislative efforts, you may not perceive, all the work that's being done, that the things that are not on that priority list, that, the hundreds of bills that are being changed or blocked on behalf of counties, they just weren't aware of all that. And so, hopefully a little more work there, and we can get this to work. Well, thank you all very much for really appreciate it. And again, I promise I'll be by in person when we get through this little period here, and would love to chat more just about CALIS.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Thanks for your time today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you again for having us. And if any of you have any aspects of this that you would like to learn more about, that you're struggling with, that isn't making sense, that we haven't described well enough, et cetera, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I would be happy to work with you and talk through whatever concerns or ideas you might have. And thank you again from my perspective for your time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Right. Bye.
Any miscellaneous? Okay, we can adjourn.